Mind over matter, overcompensating, overstatements, crookedness relating, the soul's churn in return, mental overstimulation, one word, riveting, it tethers my pilot. Streams that are promised to make seeking less.
Joel Bookard. I hope I got your name right. Just I have a thing about names. Was that correct?
So it's Joel Bouchard, but you're not the only one to get it wrong.
Bouchard. Good to know. Good to know. Thanks so much for being on, man. I appreciate you giving me some of your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. So you're a doctoral student. Is that current at the moment?
Yeah. Yep.
And you're an author yourself.
Right. Yeah. I just finished writing my first novel, so it's not published yet. Probably be over the summer, but yeah.
That's interesting, man. That's interesting. And you seem to be quite the creative yourself. I from just reading your bio, I get the gist because you do so many things. You know, I would imagine so many creative juices flowing for you, in your experience.
Yeah. It started with music when I was younger. I began playing guitar and then kind of spread to bass and drums and keyboard and a bunch of different instruments. And then, built a recording computer and started putting out albums and stuff. And then, from there got into painting and writing and, 3D printing and just all kinds of stuff. So
what was that? What was the idea behind that? Was it more like the need to explore, or was it more a passion to just almost try new things?
Yeah, I think that it comes from early in life. I think my mom was always pushing. She was just always making everything seem interesting, right? Everything, and wherever we were, whatever we were doing, she was always just saying, "Oh, you see this? Like, this does this cool thing, or it's called this, or this is the history of it," and that sort of thing. So, just throughout life, I've always felt, I've run into very few topics that I didn't find pretty interesting, right? So, I'm not somebody who's easily bored. If I come across something, I'm always interested in it. I always want to know more about it and learn about it. So.
I think those are almost they're interrelated in a sense. You have the idea to want to know more, and so information, it gives you that it's a bridge to understanding, isn't it? Where you almost you have context, you get why something is what it is, and also that gives you, it kind of reveals the beauty of that thing to you, in a sense, I would imagine.
Yeah, we live in a world where specialization is valued over being well-rounded. But I think that there's a lot of value or utility, which is not the primary reason that you do these things. But I think that there's a lot of value and utility to being somebody who has a lot of different interests, to being somebody who, what I always tell people is like, okay, so I don't think of myself as doing anything particularly well, but I'm an expert learner, right? So if you give me anything, I'll pick it up pretty quick, and I think that there's a lot of value to that. Like you said, there's things that once you learn enough things, there's some crossover between how they operate, how they work. And it's not just valuable, but it makes for a rich and fulfilling life,
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I mean, just what you're saying, what you're speaking about, I think that speaks to just having experience in general. And as we know, nothing beats experience at the end of the day. When even if you don't have a expertise to a subject, just having an experience on that subject or what you've seen, you know, just going off what you've seen, anecdotal type of situation, you know, that there's value, there's a lot of value in that as well. So, you know,
Yeah,
you never
yeah,
underplay that.
yeah. I agree with that, you know, wholeheartedly, because I think that there's a lot of people who sort of might be sleepwalking through life a little bit, or you know, you kind of just do things because you do them. There's no reflection on why, or if you even want to, right? And so that's just what I've tried to design my whole life around, you know, is I want to be doing things that I want to do, having experiences that are important to me, you know, and even if it's you know, even at work, right? You know, I have a job that I love working at, right? So if I'm going to be doing it for a third of my life, I want to be doing something that I enjoy doing. And, you know, I've had offers for significantly more money to do something else.
Yeah.
But if I can tell, you know, okay, well, we want you to answer emails after you go home, or we want you to work on the weekends or do this sort of stuff. I go, nah, it's not worth it. You know, there's it, you know, I think there's an overemphasis on money in a trade for life balance, you know, the ability to pursue the things that you want to do or you find interesting in life in a lot of cases.
That's interesting. I agree on that as well. I agree on that. Okay, stick a pin on that. Let me just read something for you. Hopefully you can relate. And then we continue our discussion. I have a few questions after. Feeling like Coach Gray, thus I'm coaching Gray. Letting the palette takes to the fact I'm staying late until the moments in my head dissipate. I'm here until a later date, through the forest and darkness until my moments pontificate. Sweating through the torment like a ghost in mine, dripping off the spine for the time can no longer organize. My madness graduate from sadness. No, I'm all that's fine. Temporal looking at me in the mirror look like you took my time. I respond through actions like the times that shines for mine, telling these words through the boldest incline. Yeah, it's what I have to share today with my audience.
Yeah, no, I think that's really relevant to what we were just talking about. You know, I think that it captures the sort of anxious, you know, dread that you feel when you start to reflect on your life and realize that that you haven't been doing the things that you wanted to do. And I think that that happens to us all at some point, right? Regardless of how great our life is or how self-reflective we are, we all end up in points where we go, oh my gosh, what am I doing? You know, like someday I'm going to die. And what am I spending these minutes, these precious minutes that I have doing, you know? So I think that really captured the essence of it.
Yeah. You kind of gathered where I was trying to go with this. Just the kind of discussion I kind of predicted we were going to have. I thought this would really capture, literally just kind of staying in the moment and just trying to stay relevant to yourself specifically, staying relevant to what matters to you and the journey that you're on, and not forgetting why you started in the first place. I think there's importance to that. So I thank you for capturing that. I have a question for you. Do you believe creativity is a factor of genetics or simply an environmental situation?
Yeah. So in psychology and in philosophy, right, we look at that a lot, this idea of nature versus nurture. You know, what are you born with and what do you learn along the way? So you've had philosophers who have said, oh, you're a blank slate and, you know, you learn everything. And you've had other philosophers of science say, no, it's all determined, right? You're born with what you have, and then things just sort of play out. I think that, you know, much as with anything in life, that the picture's more complex than that. What we know from psychology, neuroscience, is that everybody's born with genes, and genes do different things. And often there's not one gene that does a specific thing. There's several genes that contribute in several different ways. And epigenetic changes, so things that come from the environment, can turn certain genes on and off.
Yeah.
So I think that you have a certain creative you have a creative potential that is given to you in your genetics. But then the environment that you're exposed to and the choices that you make throughout life have the ability to turn certain genes on and off, and manifest them in different ways. So I think there's a lot of variability. I think that it's I think if I was going to put a number on it, and this is just anecdotal, this isn't scientific at all, but I'd say you're looking at maybe 20% of your creativity is genetic, and then the 80% is the environments you've been exposed to, the people you've come into contact with, the choices you've made throughout life, and how all those things interact together. But
that's interesting. And to add to what you're saying, yes, it's a very nuanced question, but I suspect you'll be able to kind of handle it. So I appreciate you giving the response that you did. It's interesting. I think, like you said, there's a certain potential that comes from genetics, but you can't ignore the influence, the massive influence of your environment and what you gain from that, or what you kind of almost extrapolate from that, and just exposed to over time, and the influence of such. Which leads to my next question. What's your take on fear and how it impacts creativity?
Yeah, I think that it's very individual, right? Because everybody has a different creative process. So I know, like, especially with me, with music, right? I know that I'm very different from other musicians. A lot of musicians, especially recording musicians, people who do a lot of their work in the studio, the majority of them, they like to write an album's worth of songs over a year or several years, and then they want to record them over weeks or months, and then kind of hone them that way. Whereas the way that I do it is I do it all at once, right? I will, in a week, sit down and I will write the songs as I'm recording them and put them out. And to me, that sort of fear, maybe fear isn't the right word, but there's this pressure when you go, I'm not going to revisit this to rewrite it. I'm not going to revisit this to record this part. I'm going to trust my creative intuition in the moment, and then what comes of it comes of it, right? There's definitely things I look back on, I go, well, I would do that differently now, or I would, I wish I had done this instead of that. But I think that if you let those sorts of feelings hold you back, then you're never happy with anything that you ever do, right? Because we're always changing as people, and so our tastes and what we think about as being good or bad is always changing. So I think that fear has the ability to hold you back creatively if it's motivated by perfectionism, right? If you're thinking, I can't put this out until it's perfect, well, it's never going to be perfect because it's the product of humans and we're not perfect, right? And there's a good chance if it was perfect, people wouldn't like it, right? That's almost in my critique of modern art in terms of music and a lot of other artistic formats, is that we use tools to try to take the imperfections out, right? We'll auto-tune vocals or grid drums and things, and it sucks the life out of them, So I think fear motivated by perfectionism is a negative on creativity. But can it serve a positive use? I'm not sure. I guess I never really thought about it much.
Yes, indeed. I use the word fear, but it's a little bit loose. And I say that to say, fear is a state of mind, isn't it? You either you either fear it or you understand it. And, when you understand it, that's almost like a choice to actually not live in fear in the first place, to actually understand, or like give the monster in the closet a name. In which case, it's not a monster anymore, is it? It's something I know, which means it bleeds and it has weaknesses. It's different. And so in a sense, it's almost like you veer away from fear to something that's more relatable, maybe positive. You can understand. And so it's kind of like, it's a pendulum for me, in a sense. You either fear it, or it's something that you can maybe utilize to kind of be positive in your life, and kind of elevate. And so that's why I asked that question, because I think in life, you're either driven by fear, or you're driven by something like knowledge driven, positive, and or a cause or a path. And this almost reflect on your creativity, or things that you decide to create. And
yeah, and I think that fear, all of our human emotions, right, have evolved to serve a purpose, right? And I think that where things go wrong is when we use them for reasons that they weren't intended for, or we become over reliant on one or the other. But I think that fear can help bolster some of those positive experiences through confrontation, right? If you're just afraid of something, and so therefore you avoid it, then it's a negative thing. But if you're afraid of something and you confront it, right? If I'm afraid that my song isn't good enough, right? I'm not a good enough musician. And then I confront that fear and say, well, I'm never going to be a good enough musician. And a good musician is really a subjective term, because there's some musicians that are great technical players. There's some that are great songwriters. There's some that use, effects and different textures to good use. Then confronting that fear and saying, okay, well, so what, is this a really valid thing to experience? Well, when you say, no, it's not, then it sort of frees you from it. And then you can use that as that confrontation as a way to pursue more positive outlets for your creativity.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. If I was to ask you, what would the solution be for such a situation as we're speaking about, in almost converting that fear into something that is more of information, not just data, but information, and things that you can kind of make it your own, turn this into something that can propel you to a better life, per se? Well, it's from a psychological perspective.
Yeah, it's I think it's along the lines of what I was just saying, which is, but what it comes back to, right, is this idea of being able to confront your fear in order to sort of face what the underlying issue is. Basically, what that boils down to is trying to view a situation more objectively than subjectively, right? So, and I think that's what a lot of creative people struggle with, because what makes art good is the individualism expressed, by the artist. And so where that naturally springs from is the subjective experience, what my inner life and inner experience of the art is. But when it comes to psychologically healthy adaptation, some of that requires some objectivity, right? So the ability to sort of step back, step outside your skin and say, this thing that I'm afraid of, is it valid? Or this, not choosing to pursue this or acting this way, are these things that if I were viewing somebody else doing them, I'd say, oh yeah, that's a good way to live your life? Or would I go, what are they so afraid of? Why are they putting themselves down? Why aren't they trying this new thing? So I think that that's a difficult balance for a creative type to strike. And I think that that's why some creative people struggle with mental illness to a greater degree than people who may not be necessarily as creative, is because you have a tendency to get stuck inside your own head a little bit. And when that's the case, some of those negative emotions can outpower the positive ones in some cases.
You said exactly that. And you know, it's funny because I could speak on that because I experienced that a lot of times when, you know, it's almost like certain things in my head become so real. And sometimes if it's not for logic itself, I'm convinced that this is, you know what I mean? This is there. Like I've been through this. You know what I mean? I'm getting there, this, that. But the reason why I mentioned that is, you know, going back to the fear situation, it also taps into the idea of like science versus mysticism, you know, which is where you imagine that, you know, back in the medieval times, witchcraft was born and all kind of situations like that, because it goes back to things that we don't necessarily understand, and science is more the explanation of physics, you know, all that complicated things to do with life and our situation that we're living, you know. So I thought that was interesting for sure.
Yeah, and I think that there is a space, and there should be a space for both in people's lives, right? You know, because I'm a social scientist, right? So I'm working on a PhD, and I'm very familiar and a vocal advocate of the scientific method and all the things that science can do for us. But part of that is the recognition that science can't do everything for us, right? There are questions that it can't answer and things that it can't do. And I think that in that space, that's where our creativity as humans shows up. And, you know, whether it's in the you know, the aspect of religions or arts or whatever the case, and, you know, in positive ways and in negative ways, but that's really, you know, I think that there's no way of saying, taking a scientism view and saying, well, science will answer all our questions, so there's no need for a mysticism, right? No, I think that, you know, even if science develops AI that can create music and create poetry and create all of these things, it's not going to replace what the human experience is, and that sort of mystical aspect of it. You know, I think that's important for the human experience.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head. But what separates us a lot of time, or what gets us so or what makes this situation so elusive, I would say, is the emotions behind some of these things that we experience. I think the emotional factor is so potent, it's so powerful, that it's hard to shake it off, you know, and just disregard it, because, you know, as you know, emotions and memory they're so intertwined. And, you know, that means that situation that you felt a year ago, and it's so relative to so many other things that you might have experienced to go with that. And so we put ourselves in a situation where we're probably stuck in trauma of our own making, in a sense, you know. So it's quite the intrigue.
Yeah, you know, not a lot of people are aware of it, but, you know, we like to think of ourselves as rational creatures, right? We think about things, and that's how we control ourselves. I am my thoughts, right? And that's really sort of false, right? If you look at the brain scans of people, you know, performing mental functions, what you see is, you know, all the signals run through the emotion centers of the brain before they get to the thinking centers of the brain. So, and that's why it's so hard to do things that counter to the emotional content of them, right? If you're presented with a roaring lion, you know, even if he's chained up, right, you're not going to want to walk past him to get to a door, you know, because you're rationally, you might say, oh, well, the chain's 3 feet and I have 4 feet, so I should be able to slide past him and get there. You might know that rationally, but your emotions are going to say, no, we can't go anywhere near it. And that's obviously an extreme example, but it's in a nutshell what we face on a daily basis, right? When we go to make decisions, is we don't understand that emotions influence everything that we do, including our most rational, well planned out thoughts, you know?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, man. For as you know, a long time before we kind of developed to where we are and being such cerebral creatures, you know, that part in the brain where it's more animal than man, in a sense, in terms of the being of it, the limbic system, you know, that part when it takes over in terms of extreme trauma or whatever situation, where, for example, like a lion, as you said, or a phobia, you know. You see, you have a phobia of rats. You see one on the floor. You see how the most strong, the most adolescent man will literally run out the house, scream. You know, it's a situation because there's certain things, you know, you just can't explain, you can't knock. It's just instincts, you know, and they're hard to overcome. They're hard to overcome, you know. To become as well versed as you are, you must be someone that enjoys learning and the journey that comes with it. Was there a time when perhaps you were on the other side of the spectrum, being ignorant or want nothing more but to be of such, not wanting to do, you know, understand the world as much as you do now, but it's just like it's too long, it's too much of a treading journey to get to that point. Did you ever feel like that?
Yeah. I think that, you know, is probably early and middle teenage years, right? Because I think that as a child, right, everybody has that initial curiosity and interest in the world and you know, wants to do new things. And then, you know, when you become a teenage boy, your priorities shift, right? And you go, oh, well, okay, now you're sort of narrowly focused on specific things, you know, your peer relationships and that sort of stuff. So I got bogged down in that for a few years before, you know, rediscovering, you know, the things that you had when you were younger, you know, how interesting the world is and how you know, cool everything is. But you know, it's funny because I would say that I've never been more ignorant in my life than I am right now, right? I think that the more things that you learn, the more it opens your eyes to all of the things that you don't know, you know? And so it's, you know, that's really what, that's a very strong feeling that I have. You know, when I was a teenage boy and I knew nothing, I felt confident about knowing that I had it all figured out, right? And now that I've explored so many different things and I have so many interests and things, you realize, man, the world is such a big place and there's so much to it. And there's no way that you'll ever know the smallest fraction of it. And that's a humbling thing, you know. You never get too big for your britches, right? If you're always a newbie at something, if you're always a learner at something, if you're always starting something new, and therefore failing repeatedly and you know, being terrible at it, then you never get too prideful, right?
Absolutely. I mean, what you just said there, I think that's just it speaks to you as a person. That's very consistent to who you are as a person, being somebody, because as they say, I can't remember who the wise person was that said it, but it's almost like the more you know, the more you realize how little you do know, or how much you don't know. Do you get what I mean? So
yeah,
as much as you might know a lot, compared to how much you don't know, it's almost like, man, there's no competition, you know, because there's so much information out there, and it's humbling. It is humbling. I definitely agree on that. To know that you can never learn, you can never know enough, you can never learn enough about, you know, where we are in this life, and all the information that makes the world
In
what
17
it is.
hours.
Is such a very pivotal point there. How has leadership, being a man and becoming the very being that you are today, impact your journey that you're on right now?
Yeah, I think that kind of going off what I was saying there, the longer you live, the older you get, and the more things you do and the more people you encounter, the less you take for granted anybody you come across, right? And I don't think that that's necessarily true, right? I think that if you are somebody who's very specialized, right? Let's say you're a painter and that's the only thing that you've ever done, and then you became the most famous painter in the world, right? Well, it's sort of like that it's kind of like that teenage boy mentality where you go, I've got it all figured out. I know it all, right? And so you might never escape that sort of frame of reference. But I think that, by and large, if you're somebody who is open-minded and reflective as you go through life, and you meet new people and you do new things, you start to realize that everybody's perspective is valuable, even things that, okay, so I do a lot of things that people think are cool, right? People think that music and writing and all that kind of stuff is cool. But to me, watching somebody do woodworking now is cool, right? And I don't think I would have thought that 10 years ago, but now I look at it and I go, man, what a skill to be able to do this and to know all the different wood densities and what tools to use and how to get a perfect curve and these sorts of things. Yeah. And so, yeah, everything. And that's reflected in my podcast a little bit, right? Because we talk about the big topics like God and time and things, but we also talk about, we did an episode on Disney princesses, and we've done an episode on little mundane things, right? Because the more you open your eyes to the world around you, the more you realize just how interesting everything is, So I think that that's sort of what leadership and growing up has taught me is, every person has some valuable insight as long as you're willing to hear them.
That breeds relevance to, they just on a side note, they have this saying where you're only as strong as your weakest link. And so just in life in general, when you think about, people, they tend to have a tendency to focus on the bigger things, but, it's the small things that make the world go around, in a sense, so wisdom kind of almost tells you that you can't, yes, of course, the big things, the main are the main things, and the main thing remain the main things, but you can't ignore the small things. And I think that speaks to what you're speaking about in terms of like, the episodes that you've had it's just very different, and it's just so much more relaxed topic and stuff like that. No, man, that's I really appreciate that. I have one more question, but I wanted to kind of change gears, maybe use this time to maybe have you just share what you're doing and maybe speak about your podcast a little bit. Maybe people want to, go check you out and see what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah. So I always say I'm the world's worst promoter, right? Because I like to do a bunch of things, but I really don't have much of an internet or social media presence because it's not something that's real important to me. For the most part, I do the things I do because I like doing them, and I put them out there for people to check out and enjoy if they want to, but that's really not what's important to me. So if you want to, you can find my music. You can Google Joel Bouchard music. You'll see I've got several albums out. The most recent one is All We Are. I've got a podcast called From Nowhere to Nothing. It's a philosophy podcast with me and my co-host there, Norm Gayford. And we look at all kinds of topics. So you don't have to start at the beginning. You can just scroll through, find things that are interesting to you and check them out. We go in depth looking at what the historical thought of things has been, and then sort of debate the essence of the idea, and then talk about sort of speculative questions about what it means for humanity in the future. I'm hoping my book will be published by next summer, but it's too early now. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. But
Absolutely, man. You know what? Yeah, it's been so long since I plugged myself. Speaking of bad pub promotion, yeah, I always have my book close to me, literally. So yeah, this is and don't forget, I'll definitely leave a link to your platform, and hopefully you can share more about your book for time to come. But yes, so this is my most recent. I'm working on something at the moment, but this is my most recent poetry journal, which was the inspiration behind the name Poetry Journal Podcast. So yeah, this book is one that, you know, is it's a combination. I hear from a lot of people. There's a sense of catharticism from it. A sense of you know, it's just exploration of so many different topics, and the biggest of all is therapy. You know, just unwinding, finding ways to kind of almost alleviate my own or nullify my own mind. I think I've figured out or transcended to a place where people can also relate and nullify their own mind. So with that, you know, that's Poetry Journal. But again, it's been great having you on, and yeah, man, I really enjoy the discussion, and thank you for entertaining my mad scientist questions.
No, I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun, and yeah, it was great. Absolutely,
man. We'll definitely have to try and do this again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take care, and we'll speak soon for sure. Take care.
Okay.
Mind over matter, overcompensating, overstatements, crookedness relating, the soul's churn and return, mental overstimulation, one word, riveting, it terrors my pilot. Streams that are promised to make seeking less.